Of David Bowie's private art collection as it comes up for auction here in London. Hello and welcome. Another busy day for Britain's new Prime Minister, Theresa May, as she puts her new government together. She's had a call from President Obama, who told her he looked forward to deepening the special relationship between the US and the UK over the rest of his term. Well, the surprises have kept on coming. Two leading Brexiteers enjoying contrasting fates. Michael Gove, who ran against Mrs May for the leadership, is sacked as Justice Secretary, but Andrea Leadsom, who challenged her for the top job, is promoted as Environment Secretary. The reaction's been coming in from around the world as the shock disappointment as Boris Johnson takes the top job as the top diplomat. To mull it all over from Westminster, let's cross to our political correspondent, Vicky Young.
So the new Prime Minister, Theresa May, has completed forming her new cabinet, and the surprises keep on coming. There are some jobs for those who challenged her for the leadership, but some big names have been booted out too. There are jobs for Brexiteers and those who voted for Remain in that EU referendum. Now, the former Justice Secretary, Michael Gove, who ran for the leadership, has gone and been replaced by the former Environment Secretary, Liz Truss. The new Environment Secretary is Andrea Leadsom, who, of course, also challenged Theresa May for the leadership. Out too is Nicky Morgan as Education Secretary, while Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, currently embroiled in a dispute with junior doctors, stays where he is. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, reports.
Flowers on a day of congratulation, but commiserations too. The busiest people in Westminster today were the florists.
Third time now.
Yeah. Third time?
Yeah.
It's amazing. But the Prime Minister was cracking on. Arriving for maybe her biggest job, getting her team right. It's not like they even get a job interview. Like Liz Truss, they turn up to find out what they've got. A cosy chat in number 10. Then in her case, they walk out as the new Secretary of State for Justice. Or like Justine Greening, you walk in with one cabinet post and leave with another. In her case, education. My perfect job, she said, heading straight to her new department.
Are you looking forward to a new position?
I am. I'm absolutely delighted, so looking forward to getting on with the job.
No time to waste with new responsibilities for universities and apprenticeships too. Reshuffles, though, are strange days. Imagine being Damian Green, a senior MP walking up Whitehall, hoping, but not really knowing if you're heading for the cabinet.
Who knows?
Half an hour later, in charge of the Department for Work and Pensions, leaving in the minister's car. But a politician who's had few doubts about his suitability for high office was enjoying his first day.
I've got to zoom out. I've got to zoom in. It's been a very, very busy first day for me here at the Foreign Office, and it began really with a big speech to about 700 of our staff. And I set out what I think that we need to be doing and what we need to be focusing on, and that is reshaping Britain's global profile and identity as a great global player.
So who else is in? Philip Hammond is the Chancellor, essentially the number 2. Amber Rudd is the new Home Secretary. Eurosceptic Andrea Leadsom, who quit the leadership race just days ago, moves into the cabinet in charge of rural affairs. After some confusion over his role, Jeremy Hunt stays at Health. Priti Patel, also part of the Out campaign, is promoted to DFID, the department that runs overseas aid. And Chris Grayling, who ran the Prime Minister's leadership campaign, is now in charge at Transport. Today's losers did not have to face the Downing Street walk of shame. Theresa May told some colleagues in the privacy of the Commons if their services were not required. There are more than a few tweaks around the edges. George Osborne, the Chancellor for 6 years, is out, the biggest casualty. Michael Gove, his controversial friend, was also shown the door. And Nicky Morgan, who backed him to be the leader, met the same fate. Oliver Letwin, one of David Cameron's thinkers, is out as well. And Stephen Crabb, who ran for leader too.
This is way more than the usual comings and goings of an ordinary reshuffle. This feels more like a whole new government. Theresa May has taken big, bold decisions And there's been a no-nonsense clear-out of some of the politicians who are seen by some as a clique around David Cameron and George Osborne.
There are some of the same faces and some of the same controversies and problems too. But the government looks different, very different. And under Theresa May, what some ministers do will be different too. There won't be a budget within weeks now, as George Osborne had claimed there would.
We don't see any need for an emergency budget at the moment. I expect to make an autumn statement in the usual way, having spent the summer studying the effect on the economy so far, looking at our plan for the future, consulting with the experts, starting with the Governor of the Bank of England this morning.
Remember, these changes are all within the same political party. The same side is still in charge. But the new Prime Minister wants a clean break, maybe clearing old resentments and grudges too. Don't forget, these jobs really do matter. The politics is personal too. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the new Conservative government has not been entirely welcomed in Europe. The president of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, said its composition was an attempt to keep the Tory party together rather than focus on the future of the country. And there was criticism too of the new Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, who was accused by his French counterpart of lying a lot during the referendum campaign. Our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, has more.
In a shock move, she named her party rival Boris Johnson as Secretary for Foreign Affairs.
Celle de Boris Johnson, ancien maire de Londres et chef de file des pro-Brexit.
Was kann denn die Bundesregierung von Boris Johnson und von der Regierung?
It wasn't just us who were surprised. Boris Johnson's been put in charge of quiet British diplomacy after a career strewn with colourful outbursts and more than the odd gaffe. Around the world, the reaction's been mixed. Some amusement, quite a lot of shock. On Twitter, the former Swedish leader thought it was a joke. The former Belgian Prime Minister did too. British humour has no borders, he wrote. Australia sent good wishes to a good friend, but others in France and Germany were less friendly. And Martin Schulz, President of the European Parliament, has described the cabinet reshuffle which made Mr Johnson Foreign Secretary as part of a dangerously vicious cycle since the vote to quit the EU. The criticism had come pouring down. French Foreign Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault said in an interview the new Foreign Secretary had told a lot of lies about the EU. His German counterpart called Mr Johnson's behaviour monstrous.
After a vote like the referendum result on June the 23rd, it is inevitable that there's going to be a certain amount of plaster coming off the ceiling in the chancelleries of Europe. It wasn't the result that they were expecting, and clearly they're making their views known in a frank and free way. I have to say that the gentleman that you mentioned, the French Foreign Minister, in fact, has sent me a charming letter just a couple of hours ago, saying how much he looked forward to working together.
Here in the UK, this was the reaction of one of Labour's leadership challengers.
They've just made him Foreign Secretary.
In America, they know about Boris Johnson's way with words too. He compared presidential candidate Hillary Clinton to a sadistic nurse in a mental hospital. And during President Obama's British visit, he wrote about what he called the part Kenyan president's ancestral dislike of the British Empire. In Washington, which also took the losing side against the campaign he led to leave the EU, a State Department spokesman's face spoke volumes.
The Secretary has just been announced as Boris Johnson. How do you think...
That's better.
I mean, we're always going to be able to work with the British, no matter who is occupying the role of Foreign Secretary.
Boris Johnson addressed his new staff today, looking the part. That's what diplomacy's about sometimes. Colleagues say he's got the talent and brains for the job, but he'll have to get used to being a little less interesting. John Pienaar, BBC News.
Well, it's fair to say there's been less than positive reaction in some parts of Europe to that decision to make Boris Johnson Foreign Secretary. To talk about it, let's go to Brussels and our correspondent Tom Burridge. Hi, Tom. Let's talk Boris. A lot of dismay and anger about his appointment over there in Brussels. But do you think when he gets down to business over there, these feelings might subside?
Well, look, I think with all these things, Tom, there's going to be an element of realpolitik. I think, once actually... He comes here on Monday, actually. So as soon as Monday, in theory, he's sitting in a room with the other 27 EU foreign ministers and the US Secretary of State, John Kerry. you know, there's going to have to be some kind of cordial, constructive relationship. But, you know, throughout the course of today, across the continent, and particularly here in Brussels, there's been a lot of surprise, a lot of scepticism. So I think Boris Johnson will have his work cut out, if you like, to construct that relationship. And that is key. You know, it was a sentiment echoed by the outgoing UK EU Commissioner today, Lord Hill. He just said, you know, the British government cannot cut off its nose to spite its face in these negotiations.
Indeed, you say that the ministers won't have long to wait to see Boris, who'll be there on Monday. We're still yet to see whether his brief will clash or work with this new Brexit minister that Theresa May has installed, Mr. David Davis. European negotiators over there will want to know who exactly they'll be dealing with the terms of Britain's exit, won't they?
They will. I mean, look, from his very job title, Brexit Minister suggests that David Davis is going to be the key player in the Brexit negotiations. But clearly the Foreign Secretary's got a role to play in that. And I think, you know, Monday's going to be interesting. Clearly there are other big issues on the table, Syria, Libya. But it's quite hard to think that Boris Johnson will come here to Brussels and not discuss the Brexit negotiations. So whether that will take place in a more informal sense, of course, the European Union and European politicians are insisting that no formal negotiations, at least, will begin until the British government pulls the trigger, if you like, invokes Article 50. Then there'll be the 2-year ticking clock. And of course, that in a sort of time sense, that's in the favour of the rest of the European Union, because it sort of puts the pressure on the British government to get a good deal by the end of those 2 years. And getting a good deal, you know, is going to be much easier said than done.
Interesting times, Tom. Thanks very much. Tom Burridge there in Brussels, looking at the reverberations of Boris Johnson entering the world stage of politics. Now, a look at some of the other day's news for you today. A station master in southern Italy has admitted he allowed a train to go on a single track minutes before it collided head-on with another train. He and another station master have been both suspended as part of an investigation into multiple manslaughter. 23 people died in the crash earlier this week. The rail line relies on an old phone alert system dating back to the 60s. The European Union has expanded its investigation into whether Google is breaking EU competition rules. It now includes the company's advertising business. It alleges that the adverts provided by Google are given unfair prominence by the internet giant to the detriment of its competitors. Google says it will respond to the complaints in the coming weeks. The United Nations says dozens of summary executions in eastern Ukraine have gone unpunished. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights says some of the cases could amount to war crimes. It's looked into the disappearances and deaths of at least 47 people in areas held by Russian-backed separatists. The report also lists 29 cases in government-controlled territory. Overall, the UN says there's a culture of pervasive impunity in the region. Well, joining me from Kiev is Fiona Fraser. She's in charge of the team which wrote that report. Thank you very much for joining us, Fiona. Now, obviously, it's very hard to gather information in an ongoing war zone like this, but in a protracted conflict like Ukraine, you must say that international justice, the wheels of international justice, will need to move pretty swiftly here.
Well, I mean, we've been documenting cases since the UN Human Rights Office came to Ukraine in March 2014, documenting cases where we've seen the arbitrary loss of life through killings, through abductions, also as a result of cases of torture and so forth. So this report, yes, it looks at killings and the death of individuals as a result of the conduct of hostilities, but it also looks at cases that stem from the Maidan violence in 2013 that ended in 2014, as well as the 2nd of May violence in Odessa. So it's really looking at what we've seen over the past 2 years, the increase in the number of deaths of individuals arbitrarily and through other acts, and the need we feel for there to be more accountability, for people to be held responsibility, perpetrators to be held account, and victims to feel that they are able to obtain justice, victims and their families.
Fiona, the line's a little bit dodgy here, but we'll persist and see how if it gets better. Just give us a sense of how your team gathered the information. Obviously, very difficult to get there on the ground and see what's actually happening.
Well, in eastern Ukraine, in the conflict area, the UN Human Rights Office works on both sides of the contact line. We are present there, working daily, working with individuals, speaking to them.
Fiona, I'll just leave you there. The line has deteriorated way too much to understand what you're saying, but thank you very much for joining us. That's Fiona Fraser there, who wrote that report onto some serious allegations of what's happening there in eastern Ukraine. Now, the Hungarian government has rejected accusations by UN refugee agencies of using excessive force to dispel migrants. It's deported more than 600 people since bringing in tough new laws last week. 10,000 police and soldiers have also been deployed along its southern border with Serbia. Hungary's toughening up of what were already strict controls are leading to a rise in the numbers stuck in makeshift camps on the Serbian side. James Reynolds reports from the border.
Entrusts the migrants' leader, Hamid Joya, with a list which provokes a polite scrum.
One family will go through.
1 family, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 family.
The document gives the names of the 15 migrants who will be allowed to cross into Hungary that day.
This is one of the most nervous times of day here at the camp. Families want to get a very close look at the list provided by the Hungarians. They want to see if they've moved up the line and are any closer to getting out of here.
The 15 on the list don't have much time to pack or say goodbye. Munira, who's from Afghanistan, is taking her 4-year-old son Elfat with her.
They are so happy. Yeah, after one month, after 20 days, they are staying here, and now we are going. They are happy.
You're happy as well?
Yeah, me also happy.
This turnstile is their front door into Hungary. They're called in one by one, and they step into the European Union. Trying to break through is much more dangerous. Aid workers say that Hungary has been brutal in its treatment of migrants who've cut through the border fence.
We have had a lot of testimonies from the refugees themselves last couple of weeks and medical evidence to show that it has been in some way used excessive force on the refugees being pushed back.
By the Hungarians?
By the Hungarians, yes.
Samir from Afghanistan doesn't want to show his face. He got through the fence twice and says he was pushed back with force each time.
They came with the dogs and stuff like that. They searched me, and again they took me to the border and they sprayed me over there.
At the border itself?
Yeah. When they opened the door and they pushed me inside, and after that they pepper sprayed me. They say to me, just go Serbia, go.
Hungary insists that it simply escorts migrants back across the border. More and more people end up waiting at this camp, hoping to get a place on Hungary's daily list. The door into Central Europe only opens a bit at a time. James Reynolds, BBC News, on the Serbia-Hungary border.
US media are reporting that the presumptive Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has decided his vice presidential running mate. The New York Times says his advisors are pointing to the governor of Indiana, Mike Pence. The BBC has no independent confirmation. The decision is due to be announced in New York on Friday, ahead of next week's Republican Party convention. Well, I'm happy to say that the BBC's Anthony Zerker is in Washington for us. Anthony, we need to make this clear that this is American media saying this. How certain are they?
Well, they're seeming to be increasingly certain. Mike Pence, the governor of Indiana, his hometown newspaper is now reporting that they've got it confirmed. Several wire services are saying that Donald Trump has actually told Republican leaders, Republican insiders, that Pence is his pick. There were a lot of signs even leading up to today that were pointing towards Pence. So, we won't know for certain until Donald Trump stands next to the man tomorrow at the unveiling in Manhattan. But I think we're getting to be fairly confident that that's the direction it's heading.
Anthony, just give us a quick bio. Who is Mike Pence and how is he going to help Donald Trump get to the White House?
Mike Pence, he's the governor of Indiana, a Midwestern state in a key electoral battleground for Donald Trump. Prior to that, he was a senior member of the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress. He also was one of the conservative leaders in the U.S. Congress. He actually was one of the true believers, what's considered a movement conservative, someone who touts rigid conservative orthodoxy. So this pick for Donald Trump, I think it shores up his conservative base. Helps him make evangelical voters and Tea Party voters who may have doubts about Donald Trump's conservative bona fides a little more comfortable with him. This seems like a shore up the base kind of move, not one where he's trying to reach across and broaden his appeal to, say, women or minorities. But it's a solid pick. It's got experience. You know, Donald Trump doesn't have any elective office experience, so this is a way of having someone on his team who knows the ropes in Washington.
And Anthony, these VP announcements are usually made before the conventions to generate a buzz going into them. Who is Hillary likely to announce going into her Democratic convention?
Well, right now she's about to take the stage with Tim Kaine, who's a senator from Virginia. Prior to that, he was governor of Virginia. Prior to that, he was mayor of Richmond. I think he's probably the odds-on favorite. He's a safe pick from a key swing state. There are a couple of other options, though. Julian Castro, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, is considered a pick that might expand her appeal to Hispanics. And then there's Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, a liberal firebrand. That would be kind of the Mike Pence pick for Hillary Clinton, a pick that tries to solidify the base, help turn out, generate enthusiasm within the party. But I think right now the consensus is that Tim Kaine is the man to beat.
Anthony, thanks very much. That's Anthony Zurcher in Washington. Interesting stuff, almost as interesting as what's happening in British politics right now. Now, David Bowie's private art collection is going on display in London. Nearly 300 works, which hung in the musician's multiple homes, are being shown to the public before being sold at auction in November. The collection includes works by Damien Hirst and Henry Moore. It's valued at more than $18 million. Rebecca Jones has this report.
It's a collection which reveals the tastes and personal passions of a rock superstar. David Bowie loved this spin painting by Damien Hirst.
He really valued Damien Hirst's glamorous freakiness.
David Bowie was a particular fan of Frank Auerbach and other modern and contemporary British artists such as Peter Lanyon. But as well as large works like this graffiti-style painting by Jean-Michel Basquiat, he purchased more modest little pictures, like this one by Harold Gilman, and they hung on the walls of his homes.
It's mostly emotional, and it's mostly art that somehow depicts the world, and it does so from a sort of a bohemian romantic point of view.
While the world knows all about his music, much less is known about David Bowie's life as an art collector. It was something he kept almost entirely hidden from public view, but it was a lifelong love.
I'm not a buyer of things. I think the only thing that I buy, addictively and obsessively probably, is art.
With the books, I have them all over the floor.
With his sketchbooks spread out in front of him, the artist John Virtue then uses them to create his large landscape paintings.
And you open it out.
A favourite with David Bowie.
I get a phone call saying, "Hi John, this is David. I'm in St Ives. I'll come up. Can I come up and see you?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." So 2 hours later, he and a man arrive in the car park, and the whole of that day we were in the studio.
This is a journal that I keep sort of from time to time, but I kept it on the 22nd of February 1994, which was the night I met David Bowie.
The novelist, William Boyd, was introduced to the musician at an editorial meeting for an art magazine.
Bowie had a small goatee. Up close, his face looked quite lived in, baggy-eyed. He's painfully thin. Mind you, he's almost 50 now. Old bloke, you know.
How important was art to David Bowie?
Well, he was very serious about art. He was an artist. I mean, he painted himself, and he was a very clever man. He wanted to learn more, and he wanted to discuss subjects with you. So it was not a hobby or some sort of whim of his. It was a very, very serious, passionate interest.
These pictures are just a few of the hundreds of works that David Bowie bought during his lifetime. Art, he once said, can change the way that I feel in the morning. And now his intensely private collection is going on public display later in the year. Rebecca Jones, BBC News.
And that's it from me and all the team on another day of high drama, intrigue and politics here in the UK. That's it from us, from all of us here. That's a very good bye. Up next, we have the weather.
Hello there. After a fine and a warm day for many of us on Thursday, there will be some rain arriving through the course of Friday, courtesy of this weather front here moving in from the Atlantic, whereas high pressure holds on further south. So to summarise the weather then through the day on Friday, a bit of a north-south split. Southern and southeastern parts of the country remaining dry with increasing amounts of cloud, a few spots of rain for parts of Wales and northern England, but heavy rain moving across Northern Ireland initially and then across Scotland during the afternoon. So starting off in the south across England and Wales, it will be quite cloudy in the afternoon, but feeling quite humid with the breeze coming in from the southwest, temperatures in the low 20s, just a few spots of drizzle here and there, but most places staying dry, a bit of low cloud perhaps across the hills in the north of Wales and a few showers for northwest England. For Northern Ireland, fairly muggy, 21 degrees or so, on and off outbreaks of rain. And across Scotland, things will turn damp later in the day, particularly heavy rain across the hills in the west of Scotland. Heading through Friday night into Saturday, that frontal system creeps its way further south across the country, so a few outbreaks of rain Saturday morning for parts of Wales, central England too. Now to the south of that, we've still got relatively dry and bright conditions with quite humid air coming in from the southwest, whereas to the north of that frontal system, it's a return to a fresher feel to the weather with a mix of sunshine and showers. Temperatures ranging between around about 15 to 18 to the north of that front, whereas further south, we could well see highs up to around 24 degrees. So most of us should see at least one day of brightness through the weekend. Bye-bye.